The wagon came out of the rain like a wounded thing. Garrick Vale heard it before he saw it, the grinding drag of a bad wheel, the panicked snort of horses worked too hard, the loose clatter of a lantern hook striking wood again and again. He stood beneath the broken eave of an abandoned toll shelter, cloaked dark with rain, one hand resting near the knife at his belt. The border road through the Blackpine was almost empty after sunset. Anyone foolish enough to travel it in weather like this was either rich, hunted, or dying. When the wagon finally lurched into view, he saw at once it was the third. The third wagon wheel was split and bound with rope. The third horse had been cut loose. And on the boards, washed thin by the storm, there was too much blood for one household and not enough for a battlefield. Garrick stepped out into the road and caught the lead bridle before the terrified mare could shy past him. "Easy," he muttered. "Easy, girl." There was no driver on the bench. He climbed onto the wheel hub and pushed back the sagging canvas. A dead man lay inside with his throat open to the spine, his hand still clenched around the useless handle of a broken spear. Beside him, crouched in the corner with a bundled child pressed against her chest, was a woman with blue-gray skin, soaked black hair, and horns that curled from her temples in thick ridged arcs like a ram's. Her amber eyes flashed in the dark. A dagger glinted in her fist. "Back away," she said. Her voice was low and ragged, but not weak. "I'll still cut you." Garrick took in the details in one long, practiced glance. Torn cloak. Mud on the hem. One horn nicked and blood-slick near the base. No travel chest in sight except a small one kicked under the bench. Child breathing badly. Woman on the edge of collapse and murder in equal measure. Then, from deep in the woods behind the wagon, came the long, carrying bay of hounds. The woman heard it too. Her face changed. "Those yours?" Garrick asked. "No," her fingers tightened on the dagger. "They're the hunters." Another dog answered. Then a horn, distant and sharp. Garrick let the canvas fall. "Can you walk?" For a heartbeat she just stared at him, rain running off her lashes. "Why?" "Because if you stay here," he said, already cutting the traces loose with one swift pull of his knife, "they'll take the child alive and make an example of you where the road bends." She froze at the words "take the child alive." He noticed that. "Take the chest," he said. "Leave the dead." Her mouth trembled once. "My husband. He's gone." A hard answer. He hated himself for it a little. But soft truths got people killed. The child gave a thin, feverish cry into the crook of her neck. The woman shut her eyes for a second as if she had been stabbed from the inside. When she opened them again, the tears were gone. Only the decision remained. She climbed down into the mud. "What's your name?" Garrick asked. "Leora." "The child?" She drew the bundle closer. Tiny horn buds showed through dark curls, no larger than knuckles. "Tarin." The horn sounded again, closer now. Garrick slung the chest over one shoulder and jerked his head toward the trees. "Then come on, Leora. We've got maybe 3 minutes before your hunters become ours." She hesitated only once, glancing back at the wagon and the dead man inside. Her lips moved around a name Garrick did not hear. Then she turned, and together they vanished into the rain-black forest. The Blackpine swallowed sound strangely at night. The rain hissed in the needles overhead, the mud sucked at their boots, and every now and then the whole forest seemed to breathe cold into their faces as the wind shifted through the trunks. Garrick led them off the road and down a narrow charcoal path half lost under fern and moss. He moved with the clipped certainty of a man who had spent a long portion of his life choosing where other people would die. Leora noticed. "You know these woods too well," she said between breaths. "I've used them before." "For what?" "Surviving." "That's not what I asked." Behind them, the hounds barked again. One handler shouted. The sound came wrong through the rain, closer than it should have been. Garrick cut into a streambed and started walking in the black water. It's the answer you get. Leora followed, clutching Tarin high against her shoulder. The child coughed once, a wet rattling sound that made her flinch harder than the hounds did. He has fever, she said. How long? Since midday. Medicine? In the chest. Fever root, willow bark, honey. Good. And if it isn't enough? Garrick did not answer. She caught his sleeve. If it isn't enough? He stopped and turned. Rain threaded from his beard. In the dark, his face looked carved out of old wood and old regret. Then we keep him alive long enough to find more, he said. That's the only useful thought. For a moment she looked as if she might slap him. Instead she let go. The stream bent west. Garrick took them under the drooping branches of a fallen cedar and up toward higher ground. Behind them a dog hit the road where the wagon had been and began barking itself hoarse. More horns answered. Leora's breathing sharpened. How many? Enough. You say that like you know them. Garrick glanced back only once. I know what men sound like when they've been promised a reward. Her eyes narrowed. What reward? That depends what your son is. At that, her expression closed like a gate. He's a child. That isn't what I asked either. She almost stumbled on a stone, but caught herself. Pride kept her upright more than strength. Garrick saw that too. After another 100 paces, she said very quietly, they killed my husband because he would not tell them where Tarin was born. Garrick slowed. In a village, he asked. No. A camp? A shrine? A border crossing? The rain ticked between them. Leora's grip on the child tightened. Why do you know what to ask? Because he had once hunted people for lesser secrets than that. Because men with money and holy badges had strange appetites. Because children marked by old bloodlines were stories soldiers laughed at until someone started paying in silver instead of prayers. But what he said was, because the wrong birth makes trouble. You talk like a man who has carried trouble before. He gave her a humorless look. Lady, trouble used to pay my rent. She should have been frightened by that. Instead she gave a low, bitter laugh that turned quickly into a shiver. By the time they reached the ruined watchtower on the ridge, the hounds were close enough that Tarin stirred in fear against his mother's shoulder. Garrick looked at the broken stone shell, the half-collapsed stair, the dark gap below where the old cellar still yawned open. It'll hold for an hour, he said. Leora stared into the ruin as lightning flashed far away beyond the trees. And after that? Garrick listened to the hunters climbing behind them through the wet dark. After that, he said, we earn another hour. The tower cellar smelled of wet stone, ash, and age. Garrick barred the trapdoor with a split beam and unlatched the chest while Leora knelt beside Tarin. In the glow of his hooded lantern the child looked worse than before, cheeks flushed too hot, lashes damp, lips parted with each quick little breath. The small horns rising through his hair were no bigger than a toddler's thumb, but seeing them beside his fever made something unpleasant shift in Garrick's memory. He forced it down and opened the chest. Inside lay what he expected and what he did not. Spare cloth. Dried herbs wrapped in waxed paper. 2 loaves gone hard. A child's carved wooden fox. And beneath all that, sealed papers and a rolled map marked in a careful hand. Leora leaned over Tarin, crushing fever root into honey with the pommel of her dagger. Boil water. He set a brazier going with the ease of habit. You've traveled like this long. Long enough. From where? No. He raised an eyebrow. No. No, I'm not telling you. You came into my tower. It is not your tower. My fire, then. Her mouth twitched despite herself, but the humor died quickly. I don't know you. Fair. He passed her the steaming cup. Drink some yourself. She did not. She worked the medicine onto Tarin's tongue with a fingertip, murmuring in a language Garrick did not know. It was soft and low, made of sliding vowels and quiet clicks, more sung than spoken. The child calmed under it. What language is that? Garrick asked. My mother's. What people? She looked up sharply. The sort your kind used to burn. The answer landed harder than she could know. Garrick busied himself with the papers instead. The map was old, hand-inked, showing border shrines, ferries, abandoned hill forts, and old signal roads. Notes crowded the margins in a man's writing. Likely the dead husband's. What was his name? Garrick asked. Leora's hand stopped for a fraction of a second. Amen. He drew well. He remembered roads better than faces. That sounded fond enough to hurt. A weight shifted overhead. Both of them froze. Another footstep crossed the cracked floor of the tower above. Then another. Water dripped through the old stones. Somewhere in the night a horse snorted. Leora slowly drew her dagger. Garrick pinched the lantern low until the cellar dimmed to ember red. A man's voice sounded above. Below. The trapdoor trembled under testing hands. Garrick moved to the stair, knife in one hand, hatchet in the other. He leaned close enough to Leora that she could feel the heat of him. When it opens, he whispered, take Tarin to the back wall. There's a drainage slit low to the ground. There isn't room. There's room if you choose to be smaller than fear. The trapdoor thudded once, hard. Leora grabbed his wrist. Why are you doing this? He looked at her in the dark. At the feverish child, the blood on her sleeve, the wild defiance still burning in her face even now. Maybe the answer had been waiting in him for years. Because I'm tired, he whispered, of being the man who arrives with the knives. The bars splintered. The trapdoor flew inward. The first hunter came down with a spear half raised. Garrick caught him by the throat and drove the knife up under his jaw. Blood hit hot across his hand. He used the dying man's body to jam the steps while a second hunter stumbled over him swearing. Leora was already moving, dragging the chest one-handed while she shoved herself and Tarin toward the rear wall. A crossbow bolt slammed into the stone by Garrick's head. Widow alive, someone shouted from above. The child too. Not kill the child. Take him. Garrick felt cold under the heat of battle. He ripped the fallen lantern free from a hunter's belt and flung it onto the stairs. Flame hummed up dry wood and old dust. Men cursed, backing from the sudden fire. Then a new voice, measured and calm, cut through the chaos from the floor above. Careful, it said. The boy must not burn. Garrick went still for the span of one heartbeat. He knew that voice. And that made everything worse. They escaped through the drainage culvert while the stairs burned. The tunnel was narrow enough that Garrick had to crawl on one shoulder, dragging the chest behind him and cursing every old injury in his body. Ahead of him, Leora moved with Tarin bound across her back under a blanket, her wet hair snaking across the stones. The air smelled of rot, roots, and cold mineral water. Something small and blind skittered under Garrick's palm and vanished into the dark. Behind them, muffled by stone, men shouted. Above that came the old remembered voice again, not raised, not hurried. Find the outlet. Garrick nearly laughed, though there was no humor in it. Of course Rovan Sorn would think like water and smoke. It was what he had taught his men to do. Once, Garrick had admired him for it. The culvert emptied at last into a ravine full of thorns and slick rocks. The rain had thinned to a freezing mist. Leora emerged first, rolled to her knees, and untied Tarin from her back with trembling hands. The child whimpered but did not wake fully. Garrick shoved the chest out behind him and listened. The tower above crackled. A man screamed once. A horse shrieked. Then silence, and from within it came the sound of one boot stepping carefully onto wet stone somewhere upslope. "They're on the outlet," Garrick said. Leora stood. "Then move." They plunged through the ravine, branches clawing at them. After perhaps 200 paces Garrick found a hollow beneath a fallen fir and pulled her down beside him. They crouched there breathing steam into the wet dark, shoulders almost touching, Tarin between them. The footsteps passed somewhere above. Leora closed her eyes in relief and then opened them again, hard. "Who was that?" "Captain Rovan Sorn." "You know him?" "Yes." "How well?" Garrick wiped blood from his knife on the moss. "Well enough that he taught me half the ways I know to kill a man." Her stare sharpened to something flint-bright. "So you were one of them?" "Once." There it was. The moment trust, thin as it had been, cracked under new weight. Leora shifted Tarin away from him by instinct. "You hunted people?" "Yes." "Mothers?" He said nothing. "Mothers with children?" The silence lengthened. In the dark her face changed from fear to revulsion. "I let a hunter carry my son's medicine." "You let a man who knew the woods keep your son alive." She looked ready to strike him. Instead she whispered, "What stopped you?" He could have lied. Told her greed bored him. Told her conscience arrived all at once like thunder. But the truth was meaner and smaller than that. "One winter," he said, "I followed orders into a village that was supposed to shelter rebels. We found only families. My captain burned the houses anyway to teach the rebels a lesson for not being there." Leora stared. "There was a girl outside one of the houses," Garrick said. 6, maybe. Holding her brother's mitten. She asked me if I knew where her mother had gone. He swallowed once. I did know. She was dead behind the granary. I lied because the truth would have broken her. And then I killed my captain." He looked away. Too late to help the girl. The mist gathered in Leora's lashes. Not pity. Something harder. Recognition, maybe, of the kind of wound that did not close. Above them, somewhere on the ravine edge, Rovan Sorn spoke to his men in a tone so calm it was more frightening than shouting. Garrick could not catch the words, only the cadence of command. Leora followed the sound with her eyes. "Will he stop?" "No." "Can you kill him?" "Yes." She turned back to him. "Then why are we hiding?" "Because men like Sorn were easiest to kill and hardest to bury. Because he did not yet know who else paid for this hunt. Because Tarin's fever and Leora's exhaustion made stands into suicides. Instead he said, because tonight I'm trying something ambitious." "What?" "Keeping all three of us alive." For the first time since they met, Leora looked at him not as a threat or a tool but as a man making a promise he might not be able to keep. That frightened him more than the hunters. By dawn they reached an old shepherd's shelter tucked under a basalt overhang on the western moor. It was little more than 3 walls of stone and a roof of sod half given back to the earth, but it was dry, and dry felt like luxury. The rain finally stopped. Cold light spread over the moor in sheets of pearl gray. Here the world opened wide, heather, slick black rock, a distant river flashing between hills, and farther west a line of mountains like broken teeth. Smoke from villages rose nowhere. The borderlands had a way of emptying themselves when rumors traveled faster than caravans. Leora settled Tarin on a pile of old wool and fed him watered honey from a spoon. The child's fever had dipped, but not enough. He kept reaching for the little wooden fox from the chest, clutching it with stubborn devotion. Garrick sat near the shelter mouth sharpening his knife. After a long silence, Leora said, "Aemon believed in sanctuaries." He glanced back. "Plural." He said the old road still held hiding places if you knew the marks. Shrines. Vaults. Houses built before the crowns. Her fingers brushed the roll of papers. He never told me all of it. He thought knowledge spread is knowledge sold. Wise man. He was. The quiet between those two words made the shelter feel suddenly full of the dead. Garrick held out his hand for the map. After a moment, she gave it. He spread it on his knee. Most of it was practical enough: ferries, supply caches, wells. But one mark, a circle split by a vertical line and surrounded by notes in Aemon's hand, lay west of the high moor where no village remained. "What's this?" Garrick asked. Leora stared at the symbol. He called it sanctuary. He said if the hunters ever truly found us, and if there was nowhere else left, I was to go there. Did he say what it was? No. Did he say who kept it? No. Comforting. She almost smiled, then didn't. He also said only Tarin could open the road if the signs were true. Garrick lifted his eyes from the map. What signs? Leora hesitated. Tarin was born in a ruined hill shrine near the salt flats. I went into labor during a storm. The braziers there had been dead for generations. Her voice thinned as memory took hold. When he cried for the first time, all four lit at once. Garrick let out a slow breath. I thought it was wind, she said. Aemon thought it was old oil in the stones. But then it happened again weeks later when he had a fever. And once more when soldiers searched the village where we hid. The hearth burned blue until they passed. You never told anyone. I was not trying to collect priests. Sensible. Very sensible. But not enough. He looked again at the map, at the symbol circled 3 times by Aemon's ink. If men are chasing you across 2 provinces for the child, then someone else knows more than you do. Rovan? Maybe. Leora's face hardened. Then I want his throat. Garrick gave her a long look. You say that like you've killed before. Her amber eyes met his without blinking. I say it like a widow. That silenced him. Tarin stirred, whimpered, and then, with the solemn entitlement of the very young, reached toward Garrick. Not for Garrick himself. For the wooden fox hanging from the strap of his satchel. Leora stiffened. Garrick slowly unhooked it and set it within Tarin's reach. The boy grabbed it and quieted at once. The sight of that small trust, accidental and innocent, hit harder than Garrick expected. Leora saw it. Don't mistake that. I'm not. He reaches for warm things. Garrick looked toward the moor. Then he has poor judgment. She snorted despite herself. Outside, faint and far but unmistakable, a horn sounded from the eastern ridge. They had lost time. Garrick rolled the map. We move west. To Sanctuary. It's the only place left on your husband's paper that frightens me more than the men behind us. Leora gathered Tarin and stood. The child tucked the fox under his chin as though it had always belonged there. Good, she said. Fear has a use. It tells us where the truth is hiding. The moor gave way by afternoon to old standing stones, black and lichen-patched, set in circles on the slopes like forgotten watchmen. Wind moved over them with a voice too low to be called singing. Garrick disliked the place at once. Ancient things made promises men no longer remembered how to break. Leora noticed the way he kept scanning the stones. You afraid of ghosts? Only the ones with architecture. She almost laughed. Aemon would have liked you less after that sentence. Your husband sounds like a man of quality. He was a man of suspicion. Then he would have liked me exactly the right amount. For the first time since the wagon, real warmth touched her expression. It vanished quickly when Tarin coughed. She sat on a fallen monolith and held him while Garrick searched the slope for water. When he returned with a skin half full from a spring, he found Tarin staring past Leora's shoulder at one of the standing stones. The child lifted a hand. A hairline seam of amber light appeared down the center of the stone. Garrick stopped dead. Leora turned, saw it, and inhaled sharply. The seam widened a finger's breadth, spilling warm gold over the grass. Not fire. Light. Something under the stone was waking. Then, from behind the ring, came the crack of a crossbow. The bolt struck sparks from the rock beside Garrick's head. Down, he barked. Hunters poured between the stones, 5, 6, more behind. Dark cloaks, steel caps, mud up to the knee. And at their center rode Rovan Sorn on a pale horse, watching with the cold patience of a man opening a trap he had already built in his mind. Leora threw herself over Tarin. Garrick dragged them both behind the split stone as bolts rattled around them. "Yield the child," Sorn called, his voice carrying clear over the wind. "I am under orders to preserve him." Leora looked around the edge of the stone and spat blood and rain. Then fail. A hunter rushed the gap. Garrick met him with the hatchet, buried the blade in the man's collar, ripped it free, and kicked the body into another. Metal rang. Someone screamed. Sorn did not move from the saddle. "Garrick," he called, almost conversationally. "You always were sentimental in unprofitable directions." Garrick slashed at a second man's wrist. "And you always mistook obedience for virtue." Sorn's mouth bent. "It often pays better." The seam in the stone flared. Heat washed over their backs. Tarin began to cry. The light answered. It poured from the standing stone in twisting ribbons, coiling around the child's outstretched hand. Hunters recoiled, cursing. One dropped his bow and crossed himself. Another backed away so fast he fell on the heather. Leora stared at her son in naked terror. "Tarin." Sorn's calm finally cracked. "Take him." Men surged again. The stone split open with a roar. Behind it lay a descending stair of black glass lit from beneath, spiraling down into the hill where no chamber should have been. Garrick understood the choice before Leora did. Hunters in front. Unknown below. Death here likely. Death below uncertain. He grabbed her arm. Down. She recoiled. Into that. A bolt struck the stone inches from Tarin's head. "Choose." Leora's face twisted. "Not in weakness. In the agony of motherhood, where every road is a blade and still you must step on one." She clutched Tarin and ran for the stair. Garrick turned once more to face Sorn. They locked eyes across the chaos. Sorn smiled, sure as sunrise. "There is nowhere on earth I won't follow." "Then pray it isn't earth," Garrick said, and leapt after them. The stone sealed behind him with a sound like a furnace door. The passage beneath the hill was warm. That was wrong enough to unsettle Garrick before he noticed the rest. The smooth black walls shot through with slow-moving ember lines, the bronze band set into the floor, the way their footsteps echoed not only ahead and behind but sideways too, as if the hill contained rooms folded around them in impossible angles. Leora stood at the base of the stair, breathing hard, Tarin pressed against her neck. "What is this?" Garrick listened upward. Nothing. No boots. No voices. "A bad answer to a bad prayer," he said. They moved forward into a circular chamber where 8 archways opened like the petals of some ancient metal flower. In the center stood a pedestal with a shallow bowl of pale ash. Symbols ran around its base in a script Garrick had never seen and immediately distrusted. Tarin squirmed. Before Leora could stop him, he reached down and dropped the wooden fox onto the rim of the bowl. The ash ignited. Not as fire. As memory. Light rose out of the bowl and unfolded into a map hanging in the air above them, all lines and nodes and pulsing ember threads buried beneath hills and seas. Garrick stared despite himself. There were more of these places. Many more. Most dim. Some dark. A few bright. Leora whispered, Aemon knew. A voice answered from the chamber itself, resonant and sexless, like heat speaking through stone. Bearer found. Blood remembered. Passage offered. Leora clutched Tarin so hard he whimpered. Garrick drew his knife on empty air. Show yourself. No form remains. Only charge. Only oath. The map brightened at one western point. One gate wakes. Others may wake. Choose sanctuary or command. Command. Garrick said. Leora looked at him. What does that mean? Before he could answer, another voice came from the nearest archway. Human. Male. Cultivated. Amused. It means, said Rovan Sorin as he stepped out of the dark with 2 hunters behind him, that your child is more valuable than either of you imagined. Garrick swore softly. How? Sorin spread his hands. There are older roads than stairs. The hunters raised crossbows. Garrick moved instinctively in front of Leora and Tarin. Sorin's gaze stayed on the child. The horned bloodlines once kept the Ember Gates sealed. Engines, vaults, weapons, depending on which empire is lying about them. Most of the line was purged after the Red Heresy. But blood thins slowly. Sometimes, if the old records are right, a child is born who can wake the buried fire. Leora's face had gone rigid with horror. He's a baby. He is a key, Sorin said. And keys do not choose which lock they fit. Garrick said, Who sent you? Sorin's eyes flicked to him. Men who would rather master ancient fire than fear it. Kings. Worse. Councils. That rang true. Kings were vain. Councils were patient. Leora backed away. You'll never touch him. Sorin's expression softened into something almost pitying. Madam, if I do not take him, others will. They will cut him apart looking for answers. I am offering the nearest thing to mercy still available in this matter. I have heard enough men call cruelty mercy, Garrick said. Sorin sighed. You always insist on being offended by reality. Then he lifted one hand. His hunters fired. Garrick shoved Leora sideways as bolts hissed past. One grazed his shoulder with hot, tearing pain. Tarin screamed. The bowl in the center flared white gold. The voice in the chamber spoke again, louder this time. Bearer threatened. Trial begins. The floor moved under their feet. And the whole chamber began to turn. Stone screamed against stone. The 8 archways revolved around the central bowl like the locked parts of an enormous hidden machine. One hunter lost his footing and fell between shifting seams in the floor with a cry that dropped out into impossible depth. The other grabbed a bronze band, shouting in panic. Sorin alone stayed upright, balanced and furious, eyes locked on Tarin. Leora clung to Garrick with one hand and to her child with the other as the chamber tilted. Do something. I'm considering several terrible options. The bowl flashed. New symbols ignited across the floor. Trial of refuge, said the voice. One path. One witness. One sacrifice remembered. The archways slowed. Only one remained open, the western passage, blazing with amber light. Sorin lunged. Garrick met him halfway. Steel crashed in the burning glow. Sorin was as fast as memory promised, precise and economical, each strike exactly where Garrick would have taught a younger man never to leave open. Old training met old scar tissue. Garrick blocked high, took a cut low across the ribs, and slammed his shoulder into Sorin's chest. They hit the bronze bands together hard enough to jar Garrick's teeth. Still stubborn, Sorin said through clenched teeth. Still ugly, Garrick panted. Sorin smiled with no humor at all. And yet they always paid me better. Behind them Leora ran for the western arch. Tarin's cries had changed now. Less fear. More heat. The air around him shimmered. Soren saw it and his whole face sharpened with hunger. He broke from Garrick with a vicious twist, ducked low, and drove his blade toward Leora's back, not to kill. To cripple. Garrick caught Soren's wrist with both hands, a heartbeat before the strike landed. Pain exploded through his wounded shoulder. Soren drove a knee into his stomach. Garrick nearly blacked out, but held on. Go, he shouted at Leora. She did not waste the chance. She vanished into the western passage with Tarin. Soren tore free and backhanded Garrick across the mouth with the pommel. Blood filled Garrick's teeth. He laughed anyway. That's her husband's trick, he said thickly. Run west and leave a man to bleed, buying time. Soren's eyes narrowed. Aemon was brave. He was inconvenient. For a ferryman, yes. The words snapped into place too late. Garrick stared at him. You knew him. Soren said nothing. Which was answer enough. Rage hit Garrick so cleanly it felt cold. He went at Soren with everything left in him. No finesse now. No discipline. Hatchet, knife, elbow, shoulder, boot. He drove the older man back across the turning chamber while the ancient mechanism groaned around them. Soren parried most of it, but not all. Blood opened along his cheek. Another line appeared on his jaw. Then the floor lurched again. The gap widening through the chamber swallowed the remaining hunter whole. Soren sprang back from the edge and looked once toward the western passage where Leora had fled. Then he looked at Garrick, calculating. This isn't over, he said. It never was. Soren retreated into darkness just as the chamber sealed between them with a wall of black stone. Garrick stood alone for one ragged breath, blood running down his side. Then he turned and ran after Leora. The western passage led not deeper underground but out. After a long incline of warm stone and emberlit walls, Garrick saw twilight ahead. He emerged onto a narrow ledge carved into the side of a mountain valley he could have sworn did not exist on any map. A river ran far below, silver and violent. Pines climbed the slopes. Mist hung in the air like torn silk. Across the valley, built into the living cliff, stood a place no ordinary road could reach. Sanctuary. It was part fortress, part monastery, part ruin. Arched bridges linked towers grown from black stone veined with bronze. Old fire bowls burned along terraces though no servant tended them. Horned figures moved there, some tall, some bent with age, some armored, some robed. Living people, not ghosts. A hidden remnant. Leora had stopped at the ledge mouth, stunned into stillness. Tarin pressed his feverish face into her neck. For the first time since Garrick met her, she looked less hunted than homesick. A group approached from the nearest bridge. At their head walked an old woman with skin dark blue as stormwater, one horn broken blunt at the tip, her white hair braided with copper rings. She carried no weapon Garrick could see, which meant she was likely the most dangerous person present. She stopped before Leora and looked first at Tarin, then at Leora's throat scars, then at Garrick's blood-soaked side. You came by a gate, she said. Leora nodded once. Then the old oaths are not dead after all. The woman's amber eyes softened. I am Matri Seelan. Leora's voice broke on the name. My mother spoke of a Seelan. Then your mother had better memory than most of our lost children. Seelan touched 2 fingers to her own chest in greeting. Come in. Garrick started after them. 4 armored guards stepped into his way. Seelan looked back. The man stays until I decide what he is. Leora turned at once. He saved us. He also smells of iron, ash, and hired violence, Seelan said calmly. All of which have made poor guests in this valley before. Garrick could hardly argue. Fair. Leora took a step toward him. The movement was small, but he felt it. Chosen. Deliberate. He killed your hunters, she said to Seelan. He led us here. He stood between my son and Captain Sorn. The guards did not move. Seelan studied Garrick with the unsettling patience of very old women and very old predators. And before that? Garrick met her gaze. Before that I was the kind of man your people teach stories about so children won't stray from the hearth. No one spoke. Then Seelan nodded slightly, as if some private tally had resolved. Honesty is not innocence. But it is rarer. She motioned the guards aside. Bring them in, she said. And send word. If a gate has opened, war is already walking. Inside sanctuary, warmth wrapped around them at once, baked stone, herb smoke, old wool, iron kettles, clean water. Leora nearly collapsed when attendants finally took Tarin from her long enough to treat his fever. Garrick had to sit because if he remained standing he might fall, and falling in front of this many strangers offended him on principle. Before they separated them, Leora touched his wrist. Don't leave, she said. It was only 2 words. Quiet. Frayed. But Garrick heard the trust inside them, and it hit him harder than the wound in his ribs. I won't, he said. From the upper terrace, a bronze alarm bell began to ring over the valley. Sorn had found another road. Night covered the sanctuary in gold fire and shadow. From the western wall Garrick could see torches moving in the forest below the valley, too many to count, spread in disciplined lines. Not merely Sorn's hunters now. Reinforcements. Men from the councils, perhaps, or mercenaries paid by them. The bell rang until even the stones seemed tense with it. He stood with his side bound and a fresh shirt borrowed from the sanctuary stores while Matri Seelan, Leora, and a handful of elders argued over the map chamber in the watch hall. We cannot hold a siege, said one elder, hornless and severe, his voice clipped by age. We were never meant to. We were never meant to reveal ourselves either, said another. Yet here we are. Leora stood with both palms on the table, face pale with fatigue and fury. They are not here for your walls. They are here for my son. Our son, if the line is true, Seelan corrected gently. Leora's eyes flashed. No. Mine. That silenced the room. Garrick watched her then and understood something simple and brutal: grief had not made her smaller. It had stripped her down to the iron underneath. The hunters had killed her husband and hunted her child across half the world, and somehow they had only forged her sharper. Seelan looked to Garrick. Captain Sorn. How will he come? He won't waste men on the main gate unless he wants us looking there, Garrick said. He'll probe the lower terraces, test the postern paths, send climbers on the north face. Then he'll talk. Talk. He likes to sound merciful before he starts cutting. The elders muttered darkly. Leora said, then I want to hear him when he does. Seelan's gaze moved between them. The boy has been seen by the fire chamber. Garrick frowned. What does that mean? It means, Seelan said, that Tarin did not merely open a gate. He answered it. There is old power in him. Perhaps enough to wake every Ember Gate left sleeping under these lands. And if someone controls him? Garrick asked. Seelan's silence was answer enough. At dawn, Sorn sent his message. He stood below the outer bridge beneath a white banner, unhelmeted, voice carrying up the cliff with effortless command. Men with bows lined the rocks behind him. Matri Seelan, he called. I ask parley. Seelan appeared on the wall, Leora beside her, Garrick a pace behind. Sorn's eyes found Garrick first, then Leora, then the bundle in her arms. You see, he said. I came speaking before burning. Respect my courtesy. Seelan said, "Your courtesy drips blood down the valley." Sorn inclined his head slightly. "Perhaps. But blood is cheaper than buried fire. Give me the child, and I will withdraw. Refuse, and the councils behind me will level this sanctuary stone by stone." Leora stepped to the parapet. Wind tore at her black hair and dark cloak. Her face was all sharp pains and sleepless grief. "You murdered my husband," she said. Sorn did not deny it. He would not surrender a dangerous secret. He was carrying bread. He was carrying your son. That truth was so monstrous in its calm that even the archers below shifted uneasily. Leora lifted Tarin higher so Sorn could see him. "My child is not your key," she said, voice clear as winter metal. "He is not your weapon, your bargain, your answer to old fear. He is not yours at all." For one brief second, Garrick thought Sorn might actually hear her. Not agree. Not relent. Simply hear. Then Sorn's expression closed. "A pity," he said. He dropped the white banner. Archers drew. Garrick moved without thought. He slammed Leora and Seelan down behind the parapet as arrows hissed over the wall. Bells erupted. Sanctuary answered with sling stones, bolts, and old firepots rolling from the terraces. Men screamed below. Smoke climbed. The siege began in earnest. It lasted all day. Climbers came at the north face. Garrick led the counter and drove them off with boiling oil and falling stone. 2 postern attempts failed. A third nearly opened the lower kitchens before Leora herself put a knife through the invader's throat while still carrying Tarin wrapped against her back. By dusk everyone was bleeding, tired, and out of easy victories. That was when the fire chamber called for Tarin. The old bowl at the sanctuary heart lit by itself, brighter than before, and the same voice Garrick had heard beneath the standing stones rolled through the halls. Bearer must choose. Gate or grave. Shelter or scourge. Seelan went white. "What does it mean?" Leora demanded. Seelan looked at Tarin, then at the valley where flames climbed from siege camps below. "It means the gates are waking each other. If the councils breach us, they will use him to open what should remain buried. And if they do not breach us..." Seelan shut her eyes. "Then the fire may still tear free without a keeper old enough to hold it." Garrick understood before Leora did. "He has to close them." Seelan nodded once. "Or bind them to himself so none may command them. But no child can do that alone." Leora's face emptied. "No." Seelan did not look away. "His blood can wake the gates. A guardian's life can anchor the binding." Garrick felt the word settle in the room like snow. One guardian's life. Leora clutched Tarin so fiercely he fussed and reached for her face. "No," she said again, but now it was a plea thrown at the world itself. "There has to be another way. Another ritual. Another oath." "There isn't," Seelan said softly. Garrick looked toward the outer wall where Sorn's torches burned below like a second starfield. Then he looked at Tarin, at the little fox still clenched in his fist, at Leora shaking as she held the only thing left of her world. He had spent years surviving. Fewer years regretting survival. It was a strange thing to discover, at the end of both, what his life might actually be for. He stepped forward. "I'll do it," he said. Leora turned on him with raw disbelief. "No." "Yes." "You don't decide that." "No," Garrick said quietly. "I decide what my life buys if I spend it." Her eyes filled. Not with weakness. With rage. With grief. With something far worse than either, love, arriving too late to feel fair. "I am not letting another man die for my child," she said. "Then don't let him die for nothing." Below them, Rovan Sorn's war horns began to sound for the final assault. Garrick met Leora's gaze and held it while the whole sanctuary shook around them. "I know how to buy time," he said. "You know how to keep him brave. Between us, that might be enough." She stared at him as if she could force the universe to unmake what he had just offered. But war was climbing the walls. And there was no more time left to argue with it. So Leora stepped close, seized his collar in both fists, and kissed him once with all the fury and sorrow she had left. When she pulled back, her forehead rested against his for one shaking breath. "Then come with us to the chamber," she whispered. "And if there is any mercy hiding in this world, let it see what it owes." The bells rang. The gates woke. And Garrick went with the widow and her child into the fire below the sanctuary. The fire chamber lay at the deepest point of sanctuary, beneath the oldest stone. Its ceiling rose in a black dome threaded with molten-looking veins. Bronze rings circled the floor. At the center stood a great basin sunk into the earth, empty except for pale ash and one low amber glow pulsing deep below, as if something under the mountain had a heartbeat. Tarin had stopped crying. That frightened Garrick more than if the child had screamed. He sat calm in Leora's arms, fever-bright eyes fixed on the basin as though he recognized it from some place older than memory. Seelan and the elders took their stations around the rings. Outside, dim through the stone, came the thunder of battering on the sanctuary gates and the far-off shouts of men dying in torchlight. Seelan looked at Garrick. "When the fire rises, place your hand on the basin's rim and speak your true name." He frowned. "You know it. Not the one men hired." Her gaze sharpened. "The first one. The one you carried before blood and silver bent it." He had not heard that name spoken aloud in years. Not since his mother's grave. Not since the Cinder March. Not since before he learned how cheaply a man could sell pieces of himself. Leora stood opposite him, Tarin against her shoulder. Her face was tear-streaked now and unhidden. She had run out of pride and found something braver beneath it. "I don't want your grave," she said. "You don't get it." "I know." Her mouth trembled. "I hate that." The chamber doors boomed. Once. Twice. The assault had reached the inner halls. Seelan raised both hands. "Now." Leora stepped to the basin and lowered Tarin toward the ash. The child reached out with his free hand, still holding the little wooden fox in the other. The moment his fingers touched the stone rim, fire erupted upward in a silent column, bright gold laced with blue-white at the core. Every torch in the chamber bent toward him. The voice of the gates filled the dome. Bearer found. Anchor offered. Choose. Tarin looked not at the fire, but at Garrick. He smiled. It was an ordinary child's smile, small and trusting and utterly devastating. Garrick stepped to the basin. The heat hit him like a wall, yet did not burn. Not yet. He laid his palm on the rim. The bronze glowed under his skin. "My name," he said, and the old forgotten syllables came back to him with the taste of childhood and smoke, "is Garin, son of Elsha." The fire rose higher. Pain entered him at once. Not flesh first. Memory first. He saw his mother darning a sleeve in lamplight. Saw the mitten in the snow. Saw the captain he had killed. Saw every face he had not saved and every coin he had taken anyway. Saw Leora in the wagon with her dead husband at her feet. Saw Tarin clutching the wooden fox as if the world could still be kind. The doors behind them burst inward. Rovan Sorn strode into the chamber with armed men behind him, smoke at his back, sword bright in the firelight. For the first time since Garrick had known him, Sorn looked shaken. "No," he said. "Too late." The fire wrapped Garrick's arm to the shoulder, then his chest, not burning but writing. Lines of molten gold crawled across his skin like living script. He nearly fell. Leora caught him with one hand while still holding Tarin with the other. Sorn shouted, "Take the child." A dozen sanctuary guards threw themselves into the breach. Steel met steel in the doorway. The chamber became a storm of shouting, blood, bronze, and firelight. Sorn came through it anyway. Garrick dragged himself upright, half blind with pain, and met him at the basin. Their blades clashed one final time in the heart of the waking fire. Sorn struck to kill now. No mercy. No speeches. Garrick barely held him off. The glowing lines across his skin pulsed with every heartbeat, making his vision flare white at the edges. Sorn drove him back against the basin. "You fool," Sorn hissed. "Do you know what you're destroying?" "Yes," Garrick said, and spat blood. "You." He caught Sorn's next thrust on the bronze rim. The sword rang. Tarin laughed again, and the basin answered with a blast of light that staggered everyone in the chamber. Leora saw the opening before Garrick did. She took the dagger from her belt, the same one she had pointed at him in the wagon, and buried it under Sorn's ribs to the hilt. Sorn gasped. His eyes went wide, not from pain but disbelief. As if the world had finally behaved in a way he had not planned for. Leora leaned close enough that only he and Garrick could hear her. "That," she said, voice shaking, "was for Aemon." Sorn sagged. Garrick shoved him back. The captain stumbled, hit the basin, and the fire took him. Not as flame takes wood. As judgment takes a lie. He vanished in a roar of gold. The chamber went still. Then the fire turned inward, folding around Tarin and Garrick both. The voice of the gates thundered through all of them. Bound. Hidden. Remembered. Garrick felt the world slam shut. When he woke, morning lay over the valley like pale milk. He was outside on a terrace under wool blankets, the mountain air cold against his face. For a long time he thought he was dead simply because surviving felt mathematically absurd. Then he heard a child babbling nearby and revised the conclusion. He turned his head. Leora sat a few feet away in the sunlight, Tarin in her lap. The boy was pink-cheeked, fever-broken, entirely occupied with trying to chew one ear off the wooden fox. His tiny horn buds gleamed darkly through his curls. Leora looked up and saw Garrick awake. The expression that crossed her face was too complicated for one word, relief first, then disbelief, then sudden sharp anger at the relief for being so large. "You arrogant bastard," she said, and began to cry. Garrick smiled weakly. "Alive then." She stood, still crying, and crossed to him in 3 fast steps. Seelan said the anchor might live if the fire accepted a willing guardian and a bearer not yet grown. She said might. She hit his shoulder with the flat of her hand. "You did not mention might. I was busy being noble. You were terrible at it. Frequently told so." She laughed through tears, bent, and kissed his forehead with a tenderness that nearly undid him. "What happened?" he asked after a moment. "The gates slept," she said. "All of them. Seelan says they are bound now to one line only. Hidden from command. Hidden from maps. Hidden from councils." She looked down at Tarin. "At least until he is old enough to decide whether they should remain so." And Sorn. Gone. No triumph in the word. Just ending. Garrick slowly pushed himself up. Pain lanced through his arm and chest. Under the bandages he could feel the raised lines of whatever the fire had written there. "The councils won't stop." "No," Leora said. "But they lost the easiest road." Below them, sanctuary stirred with rebuilding. Smoke rose from cook fires. Stone was being reset. Wounded men and women crossed the terraces with determined slowness. Life, stubborn and unimpressed by prophecy, had resumed the minute war stepped away. Seelan approached from the bridge, leaning on a carved staff. "You live," she said to Garrick, sounding almost annoyed. "So I've been told. The mountain objected to your manners. Perhaps that saved you. Leora snorted softly. Seelan looked at Tarin, then at both of them. The child may remain here in safety. So may his mother. Leora lifted her chin. I know. Seelan's gaze shifted to Garrick. And the man? Garrick looked out over the hidden valley. He had no trade fit for Sanctuary except violence, and Sanctuary deserved fewer knives than the world had already given it. Yet when he imagined leaving, he felt an old door inside himself shut so hard it almost hurt. Before he could answer, Tarin reached from Leora's arms toward him, demanding with solemn little fingers to be picked up. Leora rolled her eyes, though love softened everything in her face. He still reaches for warm things. Garrick held out his good arm. Tarin came willingly, settled against his chest, and offered him the mauled wooden fox as if this were a formal treaty. Garrick took it. Then he looked at Seelan. If Sanctuary needs a gatekeeper, he said, I've got experience disappointing bad men at doors. Seelan considered him for a long beat, then nodded once. A useful skill. Leora smiled then. Not the desperate, bitter ghost of a smile from the road. A real one. Tired, scarred, and alive. Far beyond the hidden valley, kings would lie, councils would scheme, and men would continue digging at old bones for buried power. But for that morning, sunlight warmed the black stone, a child laughed in Garrick's arms, and the widow who had once met him with a dagger looked at him as if the world, against all odds, had not finished making new things from ruin. And for the first time in many years, Garrick did not feel like a man running from the fire. He felt like someone who had finally chosen where to stand.